Hello everybody, and welcome back to the next episode in my series where I teach you the skills and give you the tools to start creating VFX and becoming a VFX artist yourself, either as a career or for personal projects. Today we're going to be looking at putting our skills to use that we used in the last video about the particle system, combining it with a new skill we're going to learn, which is creating shaders and creating these nice little bonfire effects. Let's go ahead and get started adding in our particle system, the little plus at the top, or right click and go to Effects and Particle System. What I normally like to do first thing is set the duration to 1, set the lifetime to 1, set the speed to 1, and the emission to 1, just so everything is nice and workable from the get-go and I'm not spamming a bunch of particles on screen, and I can scale up from here. The default particle in Unity has its uses, definitely. You can get good use out of it if you're doing more realistic looking effects. All effects are basically stylized, we're just creating imitations of, real life things when we're making realistic effects. I personally work in more of a stylized field for the games I work on, so I tend to use harder edges and avoid these soft edges like this. There's a time and place for soft edges with stylized effects, but for this effect today, we are going to need a nice hard-edged particle. Let's go ahead and right-click down at the bottom, go to Create, Shader Graph, URP, Unlit Shader Graph. This is going to give us a new shader. Let's go ahead and just name it Particle, and double-click to open it up. It's going to open up here by default, right next to your game view, asset store, all that. And we are presented with this nice blank canvas. This is Shader Graph. It's basically a node-based shader creator. I prefer not to work with code directly because I have an artist brain and I cannot comprehend too many words on screen at once. So I like to use Shader Graph. It's super simple for me to be plugging nodes in together and understanding how they all connect without looking at a wall of text. So this here is sort of our central hub for the shader. This is where everything is going to plug into that we create. Right now, by default, we only have the base color, but if we click on this, as you can see up top right, we have the inspector, and this gives us a little bit of information about the shader we have just created. An unlit material means it's going to be unaffected by lights in the scene. Lit will be affected. Decal is for decals, which I don't know. I've never gotten the base version of this to work, but they should project themselves onto Geo, and then the different sprites are up here. We're going to stick with unlit. Allow material override. That means per material we can change these values. If we do not have this on, we have to have all the materials we create with this shader accept all these values no matter what. I personally like to have this on because I always like control per material. I like to get broad use out of my shaders. The surface type, we have two options here, opaque and transparent. Opaque basically means we are not going to have any sort of transparency aside from alpha clipping, but we'll get to that in a minute. Transparent means it can become transparent. We can see through it if we adjust this alpha value. As you can see at the bottom right, the main preview is getting see-through. So we definitely want transparent for this. The blending mode gives you some different options here, basically kind of like a Photoshop, how you have different layering effects. I personally use alpha 90% of the time, so I've found no issues doing it that way. Render face, this tells the mesh either to render your front faces or your back faces or both. We just need front for this case, but I will show you uses where you would want the back or both to be on, but I think front is perfectly fine because we're just making a particle and it's going to be camera facing. Depth right, we can just leave it auto, and most of the time you can just leave it at auto. Same with the depth test. This is just feeding information into the depth buffer. For purposes of just making a particle, this is totally fine. alpha clipping, if we were to turn this on, we would basically clamp our alpha values to where there's kind of no there's no fall off, there's no smooth gradient on our cutoff here. So you see here we have a threshold on the alpha clip. Once the transparency gets below 0.5% or 0.5, it will just cull the whole thing and you won't see it anymore. It's useful for different things, but we don't need alpha clipping right now. I will get into uses for that another time. We also don't need our particle to be casting shadows. In my day-to-day work, I try as hard as I can to keep things procedural and not rely on going back and forth with Photoshop and adjusting textures. So these shape nodes are very useful for that, if I can find where they are. Procedural shapes, okay? So you just hit space, or I believe you can right click and hit create node. I use space because it's faster. And then you can actually search for shapes as well. You don't have to go down these drop arrows every time you need a certain node. So I want a rounded rectangle to start us off. So what this does is it basically gives us a texture that we can plug right into our color and see on our object. You can change what this preview looks like down here by right clicking it. I could do a quad and it'll just show you how it's going to look as a particle. I really like using rounded rectangles because you can adjust them into rounded rectangles. They can be hard rectangles if you set this to 0, or you can make them a circle. So they're pretty nice to use like that. You can also instead just use, I believe it is an ellipse. Yep. So you can make an ellipse, but you don't have the option to change that later. And you could if you added some like branches and things like that, but we're not going to get into that stuff today. We're just worried about making a simple particle shader that's going to give us a lot of cool options. Now if you look here, we have this black border around the edges here, and that's because nothing is currently plugged into our alpha. So this is going to be a mask. This is going to tell our material, hey, nothing but the white on our texture is going to be visible if we plug it into there. Now we only have the white part visible. So now that we have this very basic square particle, let's go ahead and adjust that to be an ellipse. Hit save. Go back to your scene. Still got our particle system here. If you right click on the shader or just right click over here, you can create a material out of it. If you do it on top of the shader, it will actually create a material using that shader straight away. If not, you are going to have to right click, create material. We'll name it particle as well. And then you're going to have to go up here to the shader options, drop down, shader graphs, and then you'll find your shader that you named. Any shader you create with shader graph will be in this folder by default. So you click that, and there we have it. We can apply this to the particle system by dragging it on top. Now we get this black border because it is not taking the information we've already put in the graph settings here. For whatever reason, it doesn't default to this stuff when you have material override. It defaults to the regular defaults, which is kind of annoying. But we just have to change it to what we wanted like before. Transparent. Alpha, front facing, that stuff's all fine. So now we are creating particles using our new material, which uses our new shader. Shaders basically provide your materials with the options that are baked into them. This particle system right now with our new particle is looking very boring though. This does not look like the stylized bonfire that we want to be making. So let's go back into our shader and see what changes we can make and what options we can add to support making it into a bonfire particle. Now, I am notorious for doing a bunch of spaghetti lines everywhere on my shaders. I'm going to try not to do that with this because I want to seem like I am a very clean VFX artist. So if you double click the lines on shaders, you can actually create these little joints where you can clean up the space and have some more space to put other nodes inside. So this is a good habit to get into. I personally just don't do it because nobody else really messes with my shaders besides me. But if I was working with other artists that were using my shaders, this would be advisable. It's nice to go ahead and set yourself up for the future here and give yourself some controls on this. So as you can see, you can adjust the width and the height of this. That will be handy. I'm going to go ahead and just have one control for both of them. So if I hit space here and type slider, this gives me a float that I can run this slider between 0 and 1. You can adjust the max and the default here. I'm going to set the default to 0.5, and I can plug these into the node to control both of these with this slider so that I'm just getting the maximum and minimum size here. I like sliders because I can get really fine-tuned with it. You obviously can do the same with a float. I just like to drag stuff because I have a VFX lizard brain, and I just like to get in there and start moving stuff around instead of typing numbers over and over again. So I like sliders more. And what you can do, once you set a parameter like this, you can right-click it and convert it to a property. And it puts it up here on your blackboard. Or I guess this whole thing might be called a blackboard. I think it might be just this. I don't remember, but this is where your parameters go. So now I can right-click this and name it to match its actual use within the shader. So this would be my particle size overall. If I wanted to break these apart so I could control the width and the height independently, I could. We don't need that right now. We definitely will for later effects, but I'm fine with just this for now. So if we go back to our scene view, we have our particle here. Oh, we didn't hit save. Save first, then go to our particle material, and now you can see over here that we have control over the size of the texture. Okay, this isn't the size of the particle itself, this is the size of the texture that's being applied to the quad. So you can see if you boost it really high, it starts to clip itself off the top and the sides because we're reaching the maximum boundary of the quad. Generally speaking, you want to maximize your particle space, so we'll just boost that to where it's just about to clip off the edge, but it won't. Okay, so now you see we've got these big particles. Let's go back into our shader and let's add some color control options, because if we go back in and we try to adjust this color, it's not going to do anything because this is vertex color information, and we're not passing any of that into our base color node. So we need to head into the shader, and I will show you how to do that. There are multiple ways to do color. I personally like to have the best of both worlds here. So you want to create a multiply node. And if you create a vertex color node, this is how you access your vertex color information. So if I plug this into the particle, I multiply them together. So we're saying the white values of this are multiplied with these color values. Then I can plug this into the base color node instead of this, because this is just white, right? Now we're passing some extra information through. We're saying take the vertex colors into account and then plug them into the base color. I'm going to get rid of these little bracket guys because I like spaghetti. So now if we hit save and we go back into our particle system and we adjust the color, you'll see now it's actually taking the vertex color information into account. Beautiful. And another way to do particle colors, or just colors of anything in your shader, will be just a color node. These are great. I'm going to go ahead and change this from default to HDR so we can have access to HDR colors, set it to white. Now if I switch this from vertex color to this color, and I go ahead and convert this to a property so I can see it on my material. Now the vertex color isn't changing it because we unplugged that. But if we click on the color, on the particle material, we now have options to change the color here. This is not using vertex colors, this is using, texture information, or passing colors into the texture. And a lovely thing about doing it this way is vertex colors by default here do not have access to HDR. Now what HDR does is, if you have bloom enabled on your post-processing volume, which we do, by default it's on, we can go past the edge range. We're going past the white range, right? Our maximum range here of color. And what it does is automatically spills over the edge and creates a glow effect. Beautiful, looks like a little sun. Now I'm going to warn you right now, if this is your first time discovering bloom, you're going to want to go all out all the time and just have it maxed out. Do not do that. That's a slippery slope. My portfolio still has pieces on it that are just way too bloomed out. I've yet to replace them because I've already been working in the industry a while, so I haven't done portfolio work in a minute. Still need to, but don't go overboard with this. This is a slippery slope. You're going to have effects that look like this, and you're going to miss out on details if you're so bloomed out on everything. Depending on your project settings and stuff, I hang out around like 3 bloom to 5. 5 is like very intense, but I will go that high sometimes if it's just for a couple frames, if it's like a flash effect where I need it to be intense. If not, hang out around like the 3 to 4 area at most. You just want to be able to see a little bit of that rim glow. And if you change to a color, you can see it a bit more on the edges. You don't want to go overboard. Let's go ahead and set this to a nice fiery color. Get the bloom up just a little bit. Okay, now we can start working with this. We can go into our particle system and start adjusting these values to make it more of a bonfire look. Actually, scratch that first. Let's head back to the particle shader, and I will show you how you can get the best of both worlds with vertex color and using normal colors. You just multiply those together first. I would advise not including the alpha value here because you don't necessarily have to. So if you create a combine node and then a split node, split allows you to take this information and split it individually, so we're not taking all of this and plugging it in, we're separating it. So connect the R's, the G's, and the B's, and only grab RGB out. We're only grabbing the color information, not the alpha here. Multiply this by the color we just created earlier, and then multiply that by your texture. Now we can access both, and we can include the intensity values from the HDR color into the vertex colors. And what we'll also do while we're here is this alpha is looking pretty lonely here, so let's go ahead and multiply the alpha of our texture by the alpha of the vertex color. And this is going to allow us to be able to use alpha transparency within our particle system. So if, like we did in the first video where we did color over lifetime and we faded it in and out, this is going to allow us to do that here. So you just multiply those together and then pass that into the alpha. So now we are fully equipped to do a colored particle that can have a little bit of HDR intensity. So let's head back to, let's hit save first, always hit save. We can go back to our particle here, and now you'll see if I change this value back to white, I can keep the intensity here because I can't control that within the particle system. Now if I change this here, it works, and it keeps the intensity value. So now I could use multiple particle systems that can all share this same material, so I don't have to have a bunch of extra materials for this. And I can just change the color here, so they can individually have different colors. And if you bring down the brightness here, it's actually going to bring down the HDR value as well, because it's multiplying it by a darker version of the color. So you can get a lot of good uses out of just one material. So let's go ahead and start getting this set up to be more of a bonfire. We're definitely going to want higher emission. Sure, we'll do 5 for now. The shape is already a cone, that's good, but it's very wide. We want to tighten up the angle. Not the angle, the angle's, well, let's go ahead and tighten that up too. Well, we can adjust that back later. We want to bring the radius in a little bit. So these are spawning a little closer together. Let's go ahead and change this back to a more fiery orangey color. That works for me. Now, we see how they're popping in and out of existence. We don't like that. So what do? Let's go ahead and do a size over lifetime here. And I want to do a good old up and down curve. Now we got some good stuff going on. They're growing and shrinking. Let's go ahead and increase the speed so they're traveling upwards a bit more. And let's decrease the size a little bit here because this is looking real blobby. Alright, beautiful. So now we're definitely getting more of a stylized blobby kind of fire look. What I think we can do here with this size over lifetime curve is bring it closer to the start so that they spur up a little bit faster. And with these little handles here, you can adjust the curve so it can go even beyond what you initially have set for your max. But I think we can just cap it off here nice and level so that they grow faster and then shrink down nice and slowly to the bottom. I think we could add some size variation here to help spice up our base flame. So let's do random between two constants. Let's set this to like 0.7 and 0.9, just so we get a little bit of variation. We could probably go lower than that too. Okay, maybe increase the emission a bit to help offset those smaller sizes. Yeah, that's looking good. That's looking about right. What we can add now, maybe some velocity over lifetime. Maybe we could do orbital a little bit. So this is rotated, so Z is going to be the y-axis, basically. So we can set a rotation here so that they rotate around this axis as they spawn in. And let's do random between two constants here. Let's do 2 and 4 so that they, per particle here, some rotate a little faster, some don't. That's looking nice. We could randomize the lifetime a bit here too. Let's go not that far. Let's go 0.7 and 1, so some live not quite 1 second. Maybe a little lower than that. Sure, that looks nice. It's a lot of eyeballing stuff with VFX. You just have to put numbers in and kind of guess. We can also change up the speed here. You could say some will go a little slower. That's a little too slow for my liking. Let's say 1.7 and 2. I think that's good enough there. The more randomness you insert into it, the more organic it's going to look. It's going to look less like a static fire. So I think that's a good change there. So I'm pretty happy with the base fire we have here. So let's add in some extra elements now to bring it all together a little bit more. Let's go ahead and create an empty object here and name it Bonfire. Zero out the transforms. And we'll go ahead and parent this under there. And if we zero out this now our parent object and our child have the same transform. So when you have a parent object, if you move it, it'll take the children with it. But if you move just the child, it'll offset it from the parent. 0 on the child means match the parent's position and rotation and all that. So it's nice to keep your effects kind of all orderly together under the same game object. So let's go ahead and rename this to base flame. And if we hit Control D while that's highlighted, it's going to duplicate it. We are going to rename this to embers. And get a little bit of embers going to help bring it together. So first things first here, I want to increase the radius here. Because I want these embers to kind of be popping in around the fire and not spawning in the middle of it, because we're not going to see them really if they do that. And if we change the radius thickness here, remember that allows us to say don't spawn directly in the center, only spawn on these edges. So now we got it rotating around the fire. Much better. And obviously these are too big to be embers, so let's go ahead and reduce the size down. Say 0.2, 0.3 maybe. 0.3 might even still be too big. Let's go 0.1. Yeah, that's looking good. And if we want to, we can go down to our renderer here and change it from a billboard to a stretched billboard. That's going to elongate them in the direction they're moving. You can increase that, make them real long, but we don't want them super long. We just need them just a bit. Let's go, sure, 2.5 looks okay. Maybe let's just keep it down at 2. 2 is generally good. Yeah, that's looking nice. I think they're a little bit big still, so let's go 0.05 and 1. That's looking better. So now if we highlight both, we can hit restart and play it. That's looking nice. We got some secondary detail here, maybe even tertiary, depending on your opinion. And what we need now is definitely some smoke. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and duplicate the base flame. Let's rename this one to smoke. And we're going to go ahead and adjust this color down to, sure, a gray like that. You see how we're having clipping problems here already? That's because these are trying to sort on the same layer and they're like right on top of each other. So what we can do is let's move the base flame and the embers up on the order in layer option. Let's set these to 3. So that means the smoke's always going to render behind those. I think we can probably darken up that smoke a little bit more. Remember, it's got the intensity value from this still set on it, so we have to fight with it a little bit more to get what we want. That's alright. So now we've got smoke billowing behind. Let's increase the lifetime minimum on the smoke so it goes a little bit higher and lasts a little bit longer, and I think we can increase the size of this to the minimum size, maybe the maximum size by a little bit too. So now if we play all this together, we've got this cute little stylized fire. I think we can push this smoke even more, maybe give it some more lifetime. Let's go 1.5 maximum. Oh yeah, that's looking better. Maybe increase the radius a bit. Oh yeah, that's looking cute. You could put this on the end of a torch, you could put this on a campfire, whatever you wanted to. Yeah, I really like that so far. Let's add just a little bit more detail to it, and then I think we can call it good. Let's go ahead and duplicate the base flame one more time, and we're going to call this the center flame. And let's go ahead and change the base flame color to be a little darker around the edge, more in the red-orange area. And we will sort this one even higher than that one, so it stays above it. And let's go ahead and decrease our size here. And the lifetime probably. Let's go 0.7. Speed we can go a little less too. Let's go 1.3. Size, let's bring this down to like 0.4 and 0.5. It's looking alright. I think I want to tighten up this radius though, because it's kind of spawning sporadically. There we go. Now if I hide the shape here and I play it all together, we have a little bit more detail here. We got a hotter looking center. Yeah, that's looking really nice. And this looks pretty good from all angles. When it's camera facing like this, it's generally pretty safe from all angles. It's when you get into stuff that doesn't face the camera where you have to worry about angles. But this is looking really nice. Now I want to see what this looks like in the game view. So if I click my camera here, well, if I go to game view, you see it's not lined up with the camera. So if I'm just wanting to preview my effect, or I'm recording for a portfolio or something, I can click this camera, position the scene view to where I would want it to be, hold Shift, Control, and hit F. That's going to move my camera to where my current view is. And you can do that with any object. You can move any object to where your view currently is by doing that, and it'll face the direction you're looking. So now my camera's facing this fire. Now it's pretty bloomed out here because we're on a black background. If I go to my camera, by default this is not going to be set to solid color. The background type is going to be skybox, which is fine for testing sometimes. It just looks a little, I don't know. It doesn't look as good for stuff like portfolio work or stuff like that. So you can switch it to solid color, and then you can pick what color you want on the background. Now, doing everything on black, stuff just looks better on black, but that's also noticeable for people who are observing your art. They know stuff looks better on black too. So how does your stuff look on, normal colored world backgrounds? So you need to be able to show that your stuff holds up on different color backgrounds as well. I think it holds up just fine. But yeah, everything looks better on a black background because you can see everything clearly. But in an actual game environment, you might have some light blue backgrounds with some rocks and things like that. So you want to color test yourself too and make sure it looks fine. And I think it does. And it's a lot less bloomed out now because we don't have a black background. So that's another downside to using black for portfolio recordings. But I'm overall happy with this. I hope you learned something new. I'm happy to call it quits here. Much shorter than my last video. Thankfully, I just had to cover the basics of the particle system before, but now we can get into the fun stuff with these videos and start making fun little effects to hone our skills a little bit. So, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. If you did, go ahead, comment, do the YouTube stuff. Show this to your mom, show this to your dad, get them into VFX, and I will see you next time with another VFX tutorial. Thanks, see ya!